Today, I'll tell you a story over 3,000 years old. A tale of a hero who became immortal not through the gods, but through memory. His name was Achilles. You'll learn why his mother tried to make him invulnerable and why she failed. How the future hero hid from war in a dress, and who betrayed him, why he refused to fight, and what drove him back to the battlefield, burning with rage. How his duel with Hector unfolded, and why, even after victory, Achilles found no peace. Who caused his death, and what happened to him afterward. For this story has no simple ending. This is not just a biography, it's a legend. But a legend hiding a strikingly human fear. The fear of choice, the fear of loss, the fear of being forgotten. So get comfortable. And let's begin from the moment when the Trojan War had not yet started. But there was already a boy destined to become a symbol of heroism forever. Dear friend, please subscribe. We may never see each other again. Thank you. Achilles' story doesn't begin with war, not even with his birth. It starts with a prophecy and how the gods, accustomed to controlling everything, retreated in fear. Thetis was a sea goddess, one of the Nereids, daughter of the old man Nereus, and the Oceanid Doris. Like her sisters, she dwelt in the depths of the sea, where silence, ancient power, and cold reign, but she was unique, beautiful, and majestic enough to ignite the passion of even the supreme gods. They say both Zeus and Poseidon sought her love, each in their own way. But then fate intervened. An oracle Prometheus according to some, the goddess of justice Thetis according to others declared, the son of Thetis will surpass his father. He will exceed him in strength, glory, and perhaps one day challenge him. This changed everything. For a mere mortal, it would have been a blessing. For the immortals, a threat. Zeus, upon hearing the prophecy, recoiled. Poseidon silently withdrew. Neither wanted a child born of Thetis to become a new power in the pantheon. They decided to marry her off to a human, a mortal. Thus began a chain of events that later could no longer be stopped. Thetis resisted this union. She refused marriage to a man, hid, and changed forms, first into water, then fire, then beasts, snakes, birds. But the man destined for her was no ordinary figure. His name was Peleus. He was a hero, king of the Myrmidons, a descendant of Aeacus, grandson of Zeus himself. He fought alongside Hercules, participated in the Chaldean boar hunt, and earned fame for his valor and honor. There are several versions of how he managed to wed Thetis. In one, he simply fell in love, saw her on the shore, and with the help of the wise centaur Chiron, tracked her down and held her until she ceased her transformations. In another, the gods themselves aided him to ensure it happened as planned. Either way, the wedding took place. And it was no ordinary wedding. It was a feast attended by all the great powers of that time. The Olympian gods gathered: Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Demeter. There were titans, nature spirits, nymphs, satyrs, even the fate spinners of destiny. This was a union meant to reconcile the world of gods and men. Gifts flowed like a river. Athena gave the bride a shield forged from dewdrops. Hephaestus presented a crown that shone like the sun. Apollo played the lyre. Artemis adorned the couches with flowers, but there was one who wasn't invited, Eris, the goddess of discord. Perhaps they simply forgot her, or maybe they decided her presence would bring nothing but trouble. But she came anyway. The celebration was in full swing when Eris entered the hall. No one dared stop her. She didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't cause a scene. She silently approached the table, pulled a golden apple from the mist, and tossed it into the center. On it was inscribed, "To the fairest." Silence fell. 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, reached for it simultaneously. Each believed herself worthy. Each had no doubt the apple was meant for her. And from that moment, the wedding feast turned into the beginning of a great feud. Zeus, seeing the dispute wouldn't subside, refused to judge himself. Instead, he ordered a mortal to be chosen as judge. That mortal was Paris, a young shepherd and Trojan prince, the very same who would later abduct Helen, the very same who would ignite the Trojan War. Paris would choose Aphrodite in exchange for the promise of the love of the world's most beautiful woman. And it was this choice that would set off a conflict pitting all nations and gods against each other. But that hadn't happened yet. Not yet, with the feast, the apple, the offense, and the world beginning to slowly crack. After the wedding, Thetis went to live with her husband in Phthia, in northern Greece. Their union was not born of love, but was blessed by the gods. They settled in Peleus' palace, and there, amid ordinary human affairs, in the balance between 2 natures, divine and mortal Thetis conceived a child. No one knows exactly how her pregnancy went. Myths are silent on this, but one thing is certain. All of Olympus held its breath. The son of Thetis was special even before birth. He was the continuation of the prophecy, an answer to the gods' fears. He was the one they both dreaded and awaited. And at last, he was born fair-haired. Strong as a young lion, the son of a deity and a mortal king. They named him Achilles. When Achilles came into the world, his mother, the sea goddess Thetis, did not rejoice like an ordinary mortal woman. She looked at him as those do who already know the end. She hadn't forgotten the prophecy. Her son would become great, surpass his father, but perhaps die too soon. Thetis couldn't accept that her child would die. She had lived for centuries, knew a world without age or pain, but now she had given birth to a son who, with each passing day, drew closer to death. And she decided, no, death is not for him. There are different myths about what she did. The most famous involves the River Styx. Thetis took the infant in her arms, descended to Tartarus, to the very edge of the world of the living and the dead, and immersed him in the waters of the underworld river. The Styx didn't just flow, it burned. Its waters were deadly, yet they granted a special strength to those who survived them. Holding Achilles by the heel, Thetis plunged him into the river. His body became invulnerable. No skin could be pierced. Swords and arrows couldn't touch him. But the heel, where his mother held him, remained dry, vulnerable. This story gave rise to the expression, Achilles' heel, a weak spot even in the mightiest. But there's another, older, harsher version. According to it, Thetis didn't go to the Styx. Every night she anointed the infant's body with ambrosia, the food of the gods, and then held him over fire. The flames burned away all that was mortal, purging weakness. She did this silently, focused, not as a mother, but as an ancient force determined to forge immortality. At night, Achilles cried, and by day, she continued again and again, until Peleus one day entered and saw his wife holding their son in the flames. He screamed, thinking she was killing the child. Thetis looked at him silently and vanished. She returned to the sea from whence she came. Peleus never saw her again. She left not because she didn't love, but because she could no longer save. Him, Achilles remained almost invulnerable, almost immortal, and utterly alone. Peleus didn't know how to raise such a son. He was a brave warrior, a just king, but not a god. He felt his son would be too great for the palace, too swift for ordinary life. And so, he did what the best fathers of heroes did. He entrusted his son to the wisest of all, the centaur Chiron. He lived on Mount Pelion. Unlike other centaurs, who feasted, drank, and rampaged through the forests, Chiron lived in solitude. He knew astronomy, music, medicine, hunting, the art of healing, and prophecy. He had raised many Jason, Asclepius, Orpheus, and now Achilles. The young hero settled in a cave on Pelion. His days were strict and simple. Mornings were for running up the mountain slopes, then archery, followed by potions, wounds, and bandages. Chiron taught him to find rare plants, apply dressings, and reduce fevers. Achilles knew how to stitch a wound, stop bleeding, and distinguish a poisonous leaf from a medicinal one. He played the lyre. He was called to lunch not with loud shouts, but with melodies. He composed songs that carried something of the wind, something of pain, something of future glory. Legends say Achilles was the fastest of mortals. His feet barely touched the ground. Chiron said, "You were born not to stand still." And he didn't. He raced along trails, leaped over enemies, ran across gravel, grass, puddles, always faster than all. He caught hares with his bare hands, overcame deer without weapons, stalked birds like a shadow. He wasn't just strong. He was attentive and, when needed, silent. Chiron taught him not only to win, but to restrain himself. A true hero knows when to strike, but more importantly, when not to. Gradually, Achilles became a youth. His shoulders grew broad, his voice deepened, his gaze hardened. He already knew he was different. He felt he wouldn't live like everyone else. But while he learned, while he ran, while he lived among the silence, stars, and Chiron's voice in the mountains, Achilles grew. Achilles' body strengthened, His movements became precise, his voice confident. He was no longer a child. All that Chiron taught him was now part of him. He was not just a student. He became an heir to strength. And yet, while he ran along the slopes of Pelion, training in archery and healing, somewhere else, a story was beginning, and one for which he was born. On Olympus, the threads of fate stirred. In Troy, a city he had yet to hear of, events were unfolding that would soon shake the Greek world. It all began with that apple, with how the Trojan prince Paris chose Aphrodite, with how she promised him the love of the world's most beautiful woman, and kept her word. Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, was taken to Troy. The gods again took sides in the conflict. The Greeks prepared for war, and at that moment, fate returned to Achilles. According to the prophecy, the Greeks could not win without him. Only he could tip the scales of war. But the prophecy carried a second condition. If Achilles went to the walls of Troy, he would die. There could be no victory without sacrifice, no glory without an end. The first to learn of this were not the heroes, not the gods, but then Thetis. Thetis came to Peleus and again demanded her son be saved, while there was still time. The decision was made to hide Achilles far from prying eyes, far from oaths, far from calls to glory, where no one would look for him. They chose the island of Cyrus. There ruled the old king Lycomedes, an ally, a reliable and silent man. His palace stood high in the mountains, hidden from outsiders' view. He had many daughters and no sons. There, among the girls, Achilles could disappear. Dressing a youth as a girl was madness. But what is madness compared to fate? Thus began one of the most unusual chapters in the future hero's life. He was given a feminine name by some accounts, Pyrrha, meaning red-haired, for the color of. His hair, he donned women's clothing. His hair was braided, and he entered Lycomedes' palace as one of his daughters. At first, everything felt unnatural. He moved too abruptly, spoke too deeply, but the girls accepted him, considering him reserved, strange, yet not an outsider. He began to adapt, joining their activities, playing the lyre, dancing, sometimes, sitting silently with them under the rain, gazing at the clouds. Achilles was never a coward. He didn't hide from battle, but he knew that if he joined the war now, he would die. And life, despite everything, was dear to him. He was still young, but the longer he lived on Cyrus, the more he felt a strange longing, not just for weapons, but for himself. He felt his heart didn't want to be hidden. His hands yearned to draw a bowstring, his chest to breathe freely. His body resisted submission. Meanwhile, at the palace, something happened that Thetis might not have foreseen. One of Lycomedes' daughters, Deidamia, began to show him special attention. She was drawn to this strange girl with a piercing gaze, and he didn't push her away. Myths don't detail exactly how it happened. Perhaps it began with a nighttime conversation, a touch, trust, or simply a silent acknowledgement that he wasn't who he pretended to be. In any case, a feeling flared between them. He revealed himself to her not just as a man, but as a doomed soul, and she didn't turn away. Months later, they had a child, a boy named Neoptolemus. He would later play his role in the war's finale, but for now, he was just an infant where two destinies met, one hidden, one yet to come. Meanwhile, a fleet gathered off the shores of Greece. Heroes one by one confirmed their participation. Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, Nestor, Diomedes. But the greatest among them was absent. Soothsayers said, "Without Achilles, Troy cannot be overcome. He is the key, the destruction, the victory." Then Odysseus, the craftiest of all men, set out to find him. He arrived on Cyrus, disguised as a merchant, brought chests to Lycomed's palace filled with goods, jewelry, ornaments, fabrics, mirrors, and in one chest a sword, spear, and shield. He entered the hall where the girls were, unpacked his wares. The girls rushed to the jewelry. They laughed, sorted fabrics, tried on rings. Only one figure stood apart. She looked not at the gold, but at the weapons. Odysseus noticed this and, without warning, ordered his companions to sound the battle cry. As if an attack had begun, the room trembled. The girls screamed in fright, all but one. The figure in the dress swiftly grabbed the sword and took a fighting stance. Thus Achilles was revealed. Odysseus stepped toward him. "Achilles, son of Peleus," he said, "the time has come." Silence fell. No one tried to stop it, not even Lycomedes. All waited. Achilles lowered the sword, looked at the weapon, then at the sky. They say that night Thetis appeared to him again. She begged him to stay, pleaded, offered another life, a bride, a son, a home, a long old age. He could have been happy, but he already knew. He said, "If I stay, the world will forget me. If I go, I will die. But my name will live as long as songs are sung." He chose the path of a hero. At dawn, he left Cyrus. His path led to Aulis, to the ships, to oaths, to the war to come. He hid no longer. His name was spoken aloud again. Achilles stepped out of the shadows. And now, nothing could stop fate. The story in which Achilles would find immortality begins not with swords, not with sieges, not with enmity, but with a celebration. A feast where someone wasn't invited, and an apple no one dared ignore. During the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, to which all the Olympian gods were invited, one of them, the goddess of discord Eris, was left out. She wasn't invited, fearing she would ruin the celebration. Eris came anyway, and without a word, tossed a golden apple onto the table. On it was inscribed, "To the fairest." In that moment, the feast turned into a dispute. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, three great goddesses, simultaneously claimed the title. No one wanted to yield, that the quarrel between them quickly grew into something greater. To end the dispute, Zeus ordered a judge to be chosen. That judge was the mortal Trojan prince Paris. Each goddess tried to sway him to her side. Here offered dominion over the world. Athena promised wisdom and victory in battle, and Aphrodite the love of the most beautiful woman ever known. Paris chose Aphrodite. In reward, he received Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, a woman whose beauty was considered divine. According to some versions, she followed Paris willingly. According to others, she was abducted. But the essence was the same. The king's wife was in Troy, and Menelaus' honor was insulted. Yet it wasn't just a personal slight. Before Helen became a wife, all noble Greeks had sworn an oath. If anyone threatens her union, the others will unite to restore justice. That oath now called to all. Every king, every hero, every clan had to respond. The Greeks began preparing for war. The port of Aulis was chosen to muster the forces, a convenient spot for launching ships eastward. One by one, kings and commanders arrived. Odysseus came from Ithaca, Nestor from Pylos, Diomedes from Argos, both Ajaxes from Salamis, and Locris and domed of Cyrus. The commander-in-chief was Agamemnon, elder brother of Menelaus and king of Mycenae. Hundreds of ships lined the shore. Thousands of warriors stood armed, but one among them was still missing. The seer Calchas said, "Victory is impossible without Achilles. He must join the campaign, or the plan is doomed." After the events on Cyrus, Achilles arrived in Aulis. With him came the Myrmidons, a people loyal to him, their fame preceding their steps. He was young, handsome, resolute. There was no fear in his gaze. He knew he was heading to a war from which he wouldn't return, but he had already chosen his path. And so, all the troops were gathered, but the sea was still. A day passed, yet the wind didn't blow. The ships couldn't sail, and the men grew uneasy. Calchas again invoked the gods, and the prophecy resounded with new force. Artemis was enraged. During a hunt, Agamemnon killed her sacred deer, and in his pride, claimed he surpassed the goddess in skill. Artemis didn't forgive him. For the wind to rise again, she demanded a sacrifice, not a simple one, but a terrible one. She demanded that Agamemnon sacrifice his own daughter Iphigenia. Agamemnon hesitated as a father. He was broken as a commander, clenching his teeth. The pressure of the army, the weight of the allies, oaths, and duty all pushed him toward what he didn't want. He tricked his daughter to Aulis, claiming she was to marry Achilles. When the truth was revealed, and Iphigenia stood on the altar, courting. To one version, she was sacrificed. According to another, Artemis, taking pity, replaced her with a deer and carried her to distant lands. Whatever the truth, after this, the wind rose, the ships filled their sails, and the army finally set out to sea. The journey to Troy was not instantaneous. The first stop was the island of Tenedos, where the Greeks regrouped, and they landed. On the coast of the Troad, Achilles stepped onto the land of war, not with hesitation or triumph, but with cold determination. He wasn't yet the godlike hero they would later call him. But even in those early days, his fury stood out. He didn't just fight. He brought destruction, not out of vengeance, not for plunder, but because an unstoppable force lived within him. Before the siege began, he conquered more than 10 cities. Among them was Lyrnessus, where he took a woman named Briseis captive. At the time, it seemed a minor episode, but later she would play a significant role in his fate. Among all the early clashes of the Greeks before reaching Troy, one story stood out, not for blood, but for an unexpected turn. This is the story of Telephus, king of Mysia. When the Greek fleet first set out, its path to Troy was indirect. Whether by mistake or the will of fate, myths differ. They landed in Mysia, an obscure land in northern Asia Minor. The Mysians took the Greeks for invaders, perhaps with good reason. The Greeks came armed. The army was tense and ready for battle. King Telephus of Mysia met them head-on. Telephus was no ordinary ruler. He was the son of Hercules, and heroic strength flowed in his veins. Young, strong, an experienced warrior, he had no intention of retreating. The battle flared up quickly. There were many casualties on both sides. The Greeks thought this was the start of the war with Troy, but it was a mistake. In this fight, Achilles first revealed his true might. He faced Telephus head-on. The blows were fearsome. Telephus fought valiantly, but Achilles' spear was faster. Telephus was gravely wounded. The Greeks learned they had attacked not Trojans, but allies, and withdrew. Telephus lay wounded. Yet, the wound inflicted by Achilles wouldn't heal. It burned like poison. Neither physicians nor priests could cure it. In desperation, Telephus went to the Delphic oracle and asked what to do. The answer was cryptic. He who wounded will also heal. Suffering from pain, Telephus came to Aulus, not as an enemy, but as a supplicant. He limped, leaning on a spear, and begged Achilles, "You took my strength. Give it back. Without you, I will die." Achilles was surprised, but didn't refuse. Chiron, his mentor, had once taught him not only to inflict wounds, but to heal them. According to one version, Achilles scraped shavings from his spear shaft and applied them to Telephus' wound. This wood, tied to the hero himself, acted like magic. The wound began to close. Healed, Telephus swore never to fight the Greeks again. Later, he would be the one to guide them to Troy, for until then the army had wandered, unsure of the exact route. The Greeks looked at Achilles as a sign. Even the most renowned warriors knew he was different. There was something in him they couldn't fully grasp. He was young yet terrifying, quiet yet ruthless, and his name began to echo through the camps as a name of power and danger. Thus began his fame. Thus began the war in which heroes would find immortality and perish one by one. Several years had passed since the Greeks landed on the Troad's shore. The besieged Troy still stood, proud, impregnable, surrounded by walls built by the gods' command. The Greeks awaited victory, but each new day brought only more battles, more losses, and more exhaustion. In this slow, sticky wait, under the scorching sun and the cries of crows, Achilles continued to fight and every strike of his became a legend. He didn't seek power or join the king's councils, but his name rang out more than any other, whispered by allies, prayed against by enemies. Among the conquered cities was Lyrnessus, a small but well-fortified settlement. After the victory, Achilles took a woman named Briseis captive. She wasn't a queen, but came from a noble family, and in her demeanor, they said, were both dignity and bitterness. Her husband had fallen in battle, her city had fallen, and she was left alone. Achilles, despite coming with war, treated her with respect. He didn't hold her as a war prize or turn her into an object. In the camp, they whispered that she grew close to him. To some, a concubine. To others, a companion. But to Achilles, himself a person with whom he could sit in silence without feeling lonely. The commander-in-chief of the Greek army was Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, brother of Menelaus, a man of authority, ambition, and far from flawless. His prize from one campaign, a priestess of Apollo named Chrysis, was soon demanded back. Her father, the old priest Chryses, came to the camp with gifts and a plea to return his daughter. Agamemnon refused. Offended, the priest turned to Apollo, and soon a plague swept through the Greek camp. People died quickly. Panic gripped the camp. Calchas, called to interpret the god's wrath, declared that until Chrysis was returned to her father, the curse wouldn't lift. Agamemnon complied, but demanded compensation. If he lost his woman, he would take another Briseis, and ordered her taken from Achilles. This wasn't a political move. It was humiliation, not just because he took a woman, but because Agamemnon deliberately placed himself above all. He showed that in this army, personal dignity meant nothing if you weren't a king. Achilles saw this as a slap, not only to his face, but to the very essence of heroism. He was the one who conquered, who had saved the army time and again, who never claimed the throne, and now he was cast at the feet of ambition. Achilles didn't shout. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't challenge Agamemnon to a duel. He simply left the council, returned to his tent, and declared he would fight no more. Neither he nor his myrmidons. He withdrew from a war he no longer considered his own. In his eyes, this army ceased to be an alliance of heroes. It became a mob ruled by one man's pride. From that moment, the Greek forces lost their mightiest warrior. Though no one said it aloud, everyone knew a shadow had fallen over their ranks. Without Achilles, war councils sounded hollow, attacks faltered, confidence waned. While Achilles sat in his tent, lost in silence, the Trojans launched an offensive. They were led by Hector, son of King Priam, brave, wise, and just, a true defender of his city. With his arrival, the warriors changed. They no longer hid behind walls. They began to push the Greeks back onto the plain. Hector led his troops with the resolve of a man who knew what he was dying for. Each day, the Greeks retreated closer to the sea. Their ships, once high on the shore, now formed their last line of defense. And in this growing despair, all recalled Achilles' name. But he remained silent. He didn't emerge. His tent was closed. His spear lay still. Beside him remained Patroclus, his friend, comrade, the only one who dared speak when others were silent. Patroclus wasn't as strong as Achilles, but he was deep and loyal. He saw the resentment boiling within Achilles. He saw him clench his fists at the sound of trumpets. He understood that behind his silence lay not weakness, but a wound inflicted not by an enemy, but by his own. Patroclus tried to persuade him to return to the battlefield. He spoke of comrades, of war, of dying warriors, of how the enemy was almost at their tents. But Achilles didn't hear, or pretended not to. He sat by the sea, as if waiting for the earth itself to vindicate him. Yet every evening he listened to the din of battle. Every day he knew who had fallen. Though his anger didn't subside, his heart began to burn with a different fire one that consumed not the offender, but himself. And in this prolonged silence, Patroclus, feeling he could wait no longer, began to prepare to take on something he didn't yet know or fully understand. Something that would soon change everything. But that's for the next chapter. The threat approached relentlessly. The Trojans, under Hector's leadership, step by step closed in on the ships. What once seemed unthinkable was now becoming reality. The Greeks lost their footing, retreated, faltered. Their forces, which had held beneath Troy's walls for so long, now wavered, and the name of the one who had once been their hope was spoken more often. Achilles, the warrior who refused to fight after an insult. He still remained in his tent, and each evening, gazing at the horizon, stayed in silence, behind which raged unspent anger and unresolved offense. He knew his absence cost the army dearly, yet he didn't raise his spear. His decision was made, and honor meant more to him than the cries of the dying. Beside him, in this silence day after day, was Patroclus, his friend since childhood, his shadow, his opposite, yet also his part. He knew Achilles suffered, though he didn't show it, and saw how each new report of the fallen seemed to crack his silence further. Patroclus didn't plead. He waited. When it became clear that without intervention, the Trojans would break through the Greek camp and burn the ships, he resolved to enter the tent and say what he had long kept inside. He didn't ask Achilles to forget the insult. He didn't say he must return himself. He only offered, "If you're not ready to take up arms, entrust them to me. Let me wear your armor, lead the Myrmidons into battle. Let the enemy think it's you and retreat. I won't seek glory. I only want to stop the slaughter." Achilles didn't answer for a long time. He stared at the floor, the ground, some point within himself. The inner knot, tied by offense and pain, tightened further. But he knew Patroclus, knew that behind this request lay no thirst for honor, only a sincere, inevitable impulse. And he nodded. Handing over his armor, Achilles seemed to pass on a part of himself. He reminded him, drive the enemy from the ships, but go no further. Don't approach Troy's walls. Don't cross the line where battle turns to doom. Patroclus, donned the foreign armor and became like someone he was not. The Myrmidons, silent for so long, seemed to come alive. They formed into battle order, and when the horn sounded, their cry was like an earthquake. The Greeks, who had lost hope, heard. Strength returned. The Trojans, seeing Achilles' gleaming armor, faltered. They thought he had returned and began to retreat. Driven by courage and compassion, Patroclus charged into battle. He fought like one inspired, sweeping enemies aside one by one. The battle on the plain turned. The Greeks felt the breath of victory again. But then, blinded by success, Patroclus forgot the boundary he was ordered not to cross. In the heat and fervor of victory, he approached Troy's walls. There, at the very gates, he was met by Hector. The duel between them was brief but intense. Patroclus fought with valor, but not with the certainty Achilles would have had. One precise strike, and the armor fell to the ground. Before dying, they say Patroclus said, "You killed me, but soon you'll meet the one who will avenge me." When news of Patroclus' death reached the camp, no one dared enter Achilles' tent. First, he sat as before by the sea, alone. And when he heard the words, his face didn't change. He slowly lowered his head, as if something inside had collapsed. Then he rose and cried out. This cry, they say, was heard not only in the Greek camp, but in Troy itself. His voice, filled with pain and rage, swept across the plain, and even the gods on Olympus, by legend, turned their heads. Achilles, whom nothing could compel to return, could no longer stay aside. He felt he had lost not just a comrade, but a part of himself. And now he needed no glory, no recognition. He wanted one thing to see Patroclus avenged, but his armor was gone. Hector had taken it from Patroclus' body as a trophy. Achilles found himself unarmed. Then he called to his mother Thetis. She came again, not with reproaches or pleas, but with the silence mothers bear when they outlive their children. He told her, "I know that if I return, I will die, but I am already dead." Thetis ascended to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, and he crafted new armor for Achilles, unlike any worn by a mortal before, a shield depicting the world from shepherds to stars, from harvest to sunset, from earth to war, a helmet that blazed like flame, a breastplate from which iron rebounded. He donned this armor and became different. He stood in the camp's center, and no one dared approach. The boy, the offended, even the hero were gone. He had become what he was destined to be from the start, a man with nothing left to lose. Didn't crave glory. He wanted one thing to reclaim his friend. And if that was impossible, at least to punish the one who did it. Achilles returned to the battlefield, and from that moment, the war was never the same. When Achilles stepped onto the field again, the earth seemed to change its rhythm. The Greek army lifted its spirits, as if the air gained new density. The silent fear held in the Trojans' hearts broke loose. They watched him approach, not in formation, not shielded, as if he knew no armor, but his rage was needed now. He didn't argue, didn't follow orders, didn't heed war councils. He advanced, and those in his path didn't even have time to grasp what killed them. His spear flew like thought. His strikes were flawless, and each step seemed guided by fate. He didn't fight for victory. He cleared a path, seeking the one who took Patroclus from him. Hector, standing beneath Troy's walls, knew this meeting was inevitable. He didn't flee, didn't hide, but inside, he felt. Now the fight was no longer just a matter of honor, but a judgment with no right to justification. In the city, they begged him not to go out. Priam pleaded to stay inside. His mother, Queen Hecuba, urged him, but Hector, son of Troy, understood. If he hid, the wall would fall before a stone did. And he went to meet the man whose pain had turned to power, whose rage ran deeper than war, whose shadow already loomed over the city. Before the battle began, there was a brief moment when both simply stood facing each other. Hector, knowing he was likely walking to his death. Achilles, knowing death was the one thing he no longer feared. Without words, without shouts, without grand challenges, only a gaze that said it all. Hector charged first, trying to use agility and speed, but Achilles was faster. He who for years was deemed invincible among the Trojans couldn't even touch his foe. The gods watched silently, not intervening. Only Athena, Achilles' patroness, followed him unseen, infusing precision into his movements and strength into each blow. Hector, realizing he couldn't win, tried to appeal to Achilles, saying, "If I die, return my body to my father. Don't deny me burial." But Achilles, his face devoid of anything human, replied, "As you spared Patroclus, so shall I spare you." He threw his spear and didn't miss. Hector fell like a tree cut down in a field. He still breathed, still looked as Achilles approached, but he said nothing. He stripped the armor from the body, leaving only the face as a reminder. And then, amid the scarred plain, a scene began that even the gods shuddered to witness. Achilles tied Hector's body by the ankles to his chariot, and mounting it, didn't hesitate. He raced across the field, dragging behind him the pride of Troy. Dust rose high, stones tore the flesh. The cries of Greeks and Trojans mingled like the earth's own scream. Hector's body circled the camp 3 times. No one could stop Achilles. He heard no pleas, no curses, no requests. He looked ahead, as if at the end of the path he hoped to meet the one he'd lost. Hector, once a proud defender, was now a shadow, and even his death brought no solace. Achilles felt no relief. He stood in the camp amid armor, among bodies, among cries, and realized, vengeance is done, but the void remains. His friend won't return. His soul still cries. His shield, gleaming with stars, reflected only pain. After Achilles felled Hector and avenged Patroclus' death, his journey didn't end. The war continued, and though its breath grew quieter, it held no peace or relief. The victory they had long sought brought him no comfort. He returned, the battlefield not for glory or triumph, But because he knew there was no going back, he fulfilled his vow, but the pain, instead of fading, became part of him. He fought relentlessly, without pause, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't do otherwise. Achilles' fame continued to grow, but he no longer sought songs or victories. He fought in silence, with stubborn dignity, like a man fulfilling his last duty before life. Every move carried inevitability. He didn't engage in debates, didn't listen to speeches, didn't ask for advice. And the Greeks, though they praised his name, no longer dared meet his eyes. Then a new ally appeared on the Trojan side. Memnon, son of the goddess Eos, and king of the Ethiopians, tall, majestic, surrounded by a host of loyal warriors, came to Troy as a noble guest and much-needed aid. Memnon was no brash youth. He didn't boast of his strength or flaunt his mother's name. On the contrary, his dignity seemed almost regal. He didn't clamor for glory or seek battle. But when the Trojans suffered, he raised his spear and advanced. Among those felled by his hand was Antilochus, son of Nestor, one of the few Achilles respected, and with whom he shared memories of home and youth. Antilochus' death sparked a pain in him he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. This was no longer vengeance, as with Hector. It was a return to reality, a reminder. Everything he touched vanished. Achilles openly challenged Memnon to a duel, without rage, with cold resolve. Memnon accepted, knowing this encounter couldn't be avoided. Their fight became a clash not just of strength, but of sorrow. Memnon fought honorably, and even the gods, by legend, watched their struggle with unease. Yet Achilles, driven not by anger, but by inner emptiness, proved stronger. Memnon fell, and Eos, his mother, enveloped her son in her light and carried his body beyond the world's edge, leaving the plain in silence. Almost immediately after, Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, proud and fearless, arrived at Troy's walls with a band of warrior women. She came not for spoils or someone's favor, but because she believed a woman had a right to partake in the great. Even if that participation ended in death, she didn't hide behind walls or in a tent, but demanded to enter battle at once. Hearing of her arrival, Achilles again took his spear, and without seeking counsel, went to meet her. The duel was swift, like two streams converging in one channel. Penthesilea fought with grace and strength, with valor worthy of legend. Achilles allowed no mistakes, but couldn't help acknowledging a foe destined to enter songs. As her body fell to the ground, he removed her helmet to look upon her face, and in that moment a strange silence struck him. The face beneath the armor was young, almost childlike. In her fading gaze, he saw not fear, but something akin to peace. This was the second time in the war he felt the thin thread between life and humanity. He said nothing, but the Greeks watching this scene understood. Achilles' heart had cracked again. Though no one saw exactly how from that moment, he grew even more withdrawn. He ate little, barely slept, didn't join councils. He went into battle as if by habit. He carried out each mission like a sentence. Even his enemies began to look at him not with hatred, but with pity. He was too great to live. One day, in the heat of battle as evening approached, an archer rose on the far flank. It was Paris, the very one whose decision had once sparked the war. He wasn't a famed warrior, but that day his bow was drawn with particular precision. The arrow, shot from afar, wasn't aimed at honor or strength, not head-on. It sought weakness and found it. They say Apollo guided his hand. The arrow, flying over countless warriors, struck the only vulnerable spot on Achilles' body, the heel, where his mother once held him during the Styx's cleansing. He didn't cry out, didn't fall at once. He simply sank, as if the exhaustion he'd long suppressed finally gained the right to take form. In his eyes, as he breathed, there was no fear, only something like peace, perhaps even relief. When the Greeks rushed to him, he was still alive. He looked at them not with a plea, not with reproach, but with farewell. And when his eyes closed, the sky darkened not from weather, but because one of humanity's brightest lights had gone out. Achilles' death was not a defeat, but a conclusion. Kings, heroes, even enemies felt, now everything will change. With him ended an era when a man could nearly equal the gods, if only he dared to go all the way. Achilles' death shook not just the Greek camp. It echoed even within Troy's walls. The Greeks, used to seeing him as an invincible force, suddenly found themselves without their greatest pillar. The Trojans, who had lost many sons to his hand, felt not joy but a strange emptiness. Even the gods, watching the war from Olympus' heights, fell silent for a time, as if acknowledging that more than a warrior had departed. His body, still glowing in its armor, was brought to the camp. They didn't wail or scream over him. They stood silently for a long time, and only the wind passing through the tents whispered something like a dirge. His mother, the sea goddess Thetis, appeared again. She rose from the foam not as an immortal, but as a mother come to bid farewell. She washed her son's body with water brought from the depths, and with it washed away a grief that no longer had words. He was buried with all the honors war could offer. The mound raised over his body was as high as the masts of great ships. There, by the sea, so that everyone who landed on these shores would see, here lies he who never retreated when all others did. Beside him, as Achilles had willed before. His death, Patroclus was later buried, not by blood, but by spirit a brother, whose ashes mingled with his. After the burial, a new struggle began, not for life, but for memory. His armor, forged by Hephaestus, became a point of contention between two heroes, Ajax and Odysseus. Ajax, mighty, straightforward, and just, believed by right of strength it should be his. Odysseus, cunning, wise, confident in words, argued that Achilles' glory should pass to one who could not only fight, but think. The judgment favored Odysseus. Ajax, insulted and humiliated, lost his mind and soon his life. Thus, Achilles' armor became not a sign of continuation, but the start. of another loss. But his memory didn't remain only in weapons. It was carried by one in whose blood his legacy flowed. His son Neoptolemus, born to Datimaya on Cyrus, arrived at Troy near the war's end. He was not like his father younger, more impulsive, less restrained, and it was he who was destined to perform the final act of this tale. He would kill King Priam, old and wise, before an altar in a final burst of horror when Troy fell. He would receive Briseis, once Achilles' beloved. But even after that, Achilles' name didn't fade. Blind poets sang of him. Heroes entering battle whispered his name like an incantation. Boys taking up a spear for the first time heard tales of the one who conquered, but didn't live to see victory. Achilles' fate didn't end with his body. It lived on in those who came after, in those who followed his path, aware that going to the end was granted to few. He was a man. He was a son of a goddess. He was a hero who chose his short, brilliant life. And thus, his memory is not just a recollection, but an eternal form of glory sought by all who ever stood between fear and honor. Dear friend, please subscribe. We may never see each other again. Thank you.